All right, let's dive into one of history's great paradoxes, Frederick the Great of Prussia. I mean, here's a guy who wrote flute sonatas and poetry, but he was also a warlord who completely reshaped the map of Europe through sheer brute force. The man himself was just this fascinating and, frankly, a deeply troubling contradiction. On one side of the coin, you have the artist, a man who composed over 100 musical pieces and was pen pals with Voltaire, who was the leading thinker of the Enlightenment. But then you flip it over, and you get this ruthless military commander, an absolute ruler who invaded his neighbors without any warning and plunged a whole continent into war. So what gives? Which version is the real Frederick? Was he a truly progressive ruler, dedicated to reason and culture? Or was he just a power-hungry autocrat who used those ideals as a brilliant cover to strengthen his state? To figure that out, we've got to go back to the very beginning. Frederick's complex character wasn't just something he was born with. It was forged. And the fire that forged it? His own incredibly brutal childhood. His father, Frederick William I, was famously known as the Soldier King. And let me tell you, he was obsessed with the military. He saw his son's love for music, poetry, and French culture as this profound, unacceptable weakness. The relationship was, well, it was less father and son and more drill sergeant versus a recruit who really did not want to be there. All that constant tension finally just snapped in 1730. Frederick, now 18 years old, had had enough. He tried to escape to England with his close friend von Katte. But they were caught. They were arrested and charged with treason. The Soldier King decided to teach his son a lesson he would never, ever forget. Frederick was thrown in prison and was forced to watch from his cell window as his best friend, Hans Hermann von Katte, was beheaded. This trauma just seared a permanent lesson into his mind. Sentiment is weakness. Idealism is a luxury. The only thing that guarantees survival is absolute power. 10 years later, his father died, and Frederick took that ice-cold lesson and just unleashed it on the world. He didn't just want to survive anymore. He was absolutely determined to dominate. He became king in May of 1740. By December, just 7 months later, he had launched a complete surprise invasion of the wealthy Austrian province of Silesia. It was totally unprovoked, a pure power grab, plain and simple. And this one audacious act kicked off a series of wars that would define his entire reign and change Prussia forever.
And this path to power was just a brutal, high-stakes journey. After he grabbed and secured Silesia, Frederick found himself in an even bigger fight, the 7 Years' War. This was basically a world war that pitted his small kingdom against a massive coalition of European superpowers. And the odds were, well, they were staggering. Prussia was up against Austria, France, Russia, and Sweden. By some estimates, their combined forces outnumbered Frederick's army 10-1. It became this desperate, brutal fight for the very existence of his kingdom. And by 1762, he was losing. Badly. I mean, the treasury was empty, the army was shattered, enemy troops had even occupied his capital, Berlin. Frederick was actually contemplating suicide. And then, the impossible happened. The Empress of Russia died. Her successor was a huge admirer of Frederick, and he immediately pulled Russia right out of the war. Just like that, the entire coalition against him crumbled. History calls it the miracle of the House of Brandenburg. You can't make this stuff up.
So, with Prussia's survival miraculously secured, Frederick turned his focus inward. He started to cultivate this image of a totally different kind of ruler, an enlightened monarch, a man he famously called the first servant of the state. He championed religious tolerance, which was a really radical idea at the time. But you have to ask, was this pure philosophy, or was it pragmatism? See, toleration attracted skilled immigrants. Huguenots, Catholics, Jews, who brought vital money and expertise, which was perfect for boosting Prussia's shattered economy. He launched this whole wave of domestic reforms. He modernized the legal system, he abolished most forms of torture, and he pushed really hard for agricultural innovations. In fact, he was so passionate about promoting the potato as a new staple crop that he actually earned the nickname Kartoffelkönig, the Potato King. But this is where that contradiction comes roaring back, maybe sharper than ever. For all his enlightened reforms, the reality on the ground was still one of absolute rule. Serfdom, which basically tied peasants to the land, it stayed. The powerful nobility, they kept their iron grip on the army and the government. Every single reform was ultimately designed to make the Prussian state, and by extension the king, more efficient and more powerful. So what are we left with? When all the dust settles, how do we even measure the legacy of a man who was equal parts visionary reformer and ruthless warlord? Well, the results of his reign are just undeniable. Look at the numbers. During his time on the throne, Prussia's population nearly tripled. Its army, the engine of all his power, grew from 80,000 to 200,000 strong, becoming one of Europe's most feared fighting forces. He dragged a second-rate state onto the main stage and made it a great power. This was his famous motto. And it really captured his incredible work ethic, sure, but it also revealed his core philosophy. The king and the state were one and the same thing. He served the state by making it stronger, and there was absolutely no room for anyone else to question how he did it. In the end, this is the portrait that emerges. A man of deep, profound contradictions. The musician who personally led cavalry charges into battle. The intellectual who saw war as just another tool of statecraft. The modernizer who believed only in his own absolute authority. So that leaves us with a really vital question. Is Frederick the Great a model for how to build a strong, efficient nation through discipline and rational reform? Or is he a timeless warning that even the most enlightened ruler, when given absolute power, will ultimately serve that power above all else? The answer, just like the man himself, remains incredibly complicated.